All right, so this is the 2005 Ford Escape four-wheel drive model. Transfer case is bad on it. Sounds like a bunch of marbles rolling around in there. And in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to remove and reinstall the transfer case. Okay, so I got a 2005 Ford Escape here. Purchased it a year ago with 130,000 miles. It's got 140,000 on it now, and a week ago it started making some awful noise when it's rolling. After looking at the brakes, drive shaft, going through the gears of the transmission, it was still continuing to make the noise, and what I realized is the transfer case needs to be replaced. I opened the drain plug for that, and metal chunks started coming out. So this is a common problem on these Ford Escapes. Got a quote for a repair between $3,000 and $4,000. It's more than what the vehicle is worth, so I'm gonna try and tackle it myself. I found a rebuilt unit online that I'm gonna be installing in this. In my garage here, I'm not a pro in any way, but you know, I like doing things myself. So what I'm gonna start by doing is disconnecting the battery, draining the transfer case fluid, the transmission fluid, inside the front wheel here, because the axle on this side has got to come out to be able to get at the transfer case, because the axle kind of goes through the transfer case from this side into the transmission. So we'll pop that cap off right there, loosen the axle nut while it's on the ground. Like I said, drain the fluids, and this cross member right here is going to have to come off. Portion of the exhaust right here, there's a bracket up there. We'll have to release the drive shaft right here from the transfer case, which that's the transfer case right there. So like I said, I'm going to start with disconnecting the battery just because I'm going to be working near the alternator. Just don't want to cause any problems for myself. So little 8mm, just loosen these guys up. Pull that off, pull that guy off. I'm gonna try and keep this whole job as safe as possible. I'm gonna get the thing up on jack stands once I have the fluids drained out and that axle nut loosened up a little bit right there. So for the transfer case drain, I'm using a H6 metric hex head socket on my socket wrench here, or you can use a 6mm Allen wrench. Just make sure that it's a true 6mm. This drain nut is it's a true 6mm. Like I said, I had an Allen wrench that felt a little too small in there, and I didn't want to risk stripping that nut out, so I bought a Allen wrench hex head socket that measured a true 6" with a 6mm with a caliper. So make sure you're spot on with that one. And for the transmission drain, it's this one right here. Just have a short extension on with a 3/8 drive socket wrench. Fits right in there, and I already cracked it loose, but you know, that's it. So okay, so I got all the fluid drained out, the transmission and transfer case. Like I said, the next thing I'm going to do is break this axle nut loose here, just so I don't have to do it when I'm up in the air on jack stands. But if you don't do that while it's on the ground, you can just have somebody step on the brakes and loosen it up that way. Shouldn't be too tight. This is a 32mm socket, and I got like I don't know, 24-inch breaker bar here that I'm going to use. I just soaked it with a little bit of WD-40 beforehand. And like I said, I'm going to try and keep you updated on how long this has taken me. So far, I'm about 20 minutes in. So I'm hoping this this job isn't as bad as it sounds. All right, so I got the vehicle up on jack stands now. I have them sitting under the jacking points here on the front end. I'm also just gonna leave the jack here, and then I'll pop this tire off, probably throw it underneath here, just as an extra added bit of safety. You know, my jack doesn't go high enough to put it on the jack stand, so I'm using wood blocks. I don't recommend. Okay, so next, what I'm gonna do is loosen these two. These are both 18 millimeter, so I have a socket for one side, a wrench for the other side. I'm gonna loosen this guy here just to get that out of the way a little bit. That's a 14 millimeter, and then I'm going to remove the brake line from this bracket right here, just to get all that out of the way as well. But I'm just gonna be careful that when I pull this down to get the axle out, that I'm not putting too much tension on the brake line here. So I'm gonna figure out a way to support all that once I get this loosened up. The axle nut, I got that completely loosened. So next we're gonna just be loosening all those and then tackle getting that axle out of there. Okay, so the 10 millimeter came out of here nice and easy. And that holds this, is it probably like an ABS sensor? Something, and then but this is just a bracket that holds the brake line in place. And what I found is I just put a little flathead in here and just kind of twist it back and forth, and what I'm thinking is that thing should pop right out, and then the brake line just comes out of there. So I'm gonna need two hands to do this, I think, but yeah, so that popped out pretty easy with using two hands, and then just pull the brake line down, get it out of the way. So, and these guys, they broke loose pretty easily. I soaked everything with WD-40 beforehand. So, okay, so far this has all been coming apart pretty easily. I have those two out. I just have the screwdriver in here just to hold it all in place. I did forget one thing here. This castle nut needs to come out of here to pop this up out of there, just to give us plenty of room to pull the axle out. So there's a cotter pin, and we'll have to loosen that. I'm thinking that's probably a 14 or 15 millimeter, but I'll let you know. All right, so I lost my cotter pin. It was kind of tricky to get out. I mean, nothing serious at all, but I ended up using a flat blade screwdriver and a hammer and just kind of tapped it out, and on my last tap it went flying. So I don't know, it's around here somewhere. I'll have to do a little digging. I don't want that caught up anywhere. So and now this castle nut is actually an 18 millimeter, so I'm going to use my impact to just break that loose. And aside from that, I think everything else is out, and we'll be ready to try and start getting that axle out of there. So that castle nut came off really easily with the impact, and then I just took my I'm using this tiny little hammer here. I've seen videos of guys with like 2.5 pound sledges just wailing on this right here to get this to pop off. And I mean, I did honestly just a couple very light taps on this, and it popped right out of there. I mean, this is a 20-year-old vehicle, and I don't want to start causing extra problems for myself. So I'm trying to take this, trying to take my time with this, and I don't want to make any mistakes at all here. This is an Arizona vehicle, so there's no rust on it, anything like that. So I think that's probably part of the reason why all these parts are coming apart very easily. So got that off. I'm gonna take this whole thing down, this whole assembly. Again, I'm not going to put too much pressure on the brake line, and then see if I can push the axle through the whole brake assembly here, and then get in there to release the rest of it. So we'll keep moving. Okay, so I got away from the idea of removing this guy because, like I said, all I had was a 1/4 inch hex to get in here. and this one broke loose really easily. This one didn't want to, so I quit before I caused myself any problems and stripped that guy out. And what I ended up doing is just, like I said, leaving it on and pulling this whole assembly down a bit. And as I did that, I just slightly tapped on the end of the axle right there. I mean, very slightly. I was just slowly tapping like that through here, and you know, just kind of keeping this in a downward position, making sure not to put too much tension on this. And you know, it popped right through the back really easily. Not using a lot of force on anything. And so I took some baling wire and just tied this up through here. I wrapped it through twice, just to make sure I'm not putting any tension on the brake line, that it's not kinked real bad. Not putting tension on this. So like I said, that axle came out pretty easily. And next, what we're going to be doing is going in here. And so I need to get in there to get that one, and I believe there's another one in there somewhere, maybe down below, inside there, maybe not, maybe. All right, so I have my 18-inch extension on socket wrench with a 12mm on the end, and there's two nuts inside there that are just kind of holding that axle in. There's just a bracket in there. So I'm thinking once we have that out, I'll get underneath, use a pry bar, and just kind of pry the axle out of the transmission and transfer case, hoping that continues to go smoothly. Okay, so what I'm doing next here is just looking for a spot to pry the axle from. So those two nuts that I took off, it released this thing. So this is just a cover, and I think, so I was looking underneath here. This is the axle here, kind of goes over this bracket, which I'll end up taking that off too. I'm not going to do that right now because there's two nuts up here that I think it'll be easier to get at once the axle is out. So I took a magnet to see if this is metal, because I was going to pry against this, but that is not metal right there, so I don't want to pry that. I was going to put a pry bar kind of in there to see if I could pop it loose, but what I'm going to do is, this is metal, we got a little bit heavier material here, so I'm going to put a pry bar basically right in here and see if I can just pop it loose. I have a feeling, yeah, geez, wow, I just used my magnet and it came loose. So that whole axle assembly is going to come out of there really easily. Make sure that you drain your fluids before you do this, because right now this is when you're going to start losing fluid like crazy if you have not drained it already. So make sure that you drain all your fluid. And like I said, you know, it looks like this whole axle assembly is going to come out pretty easily. Yeah, it is. So I'm going to get that out of there and continue. All right, so that whole axle assembly came out extremely easy. I mean, I'm about an hour into this right now. Next, I think I'm going to get that bracket off right there. Or actually, I'll probably remove that section of the exhaust down there and then release the drive shaft and continue on. But, you know, I'm just taking a look at this axle. Everything looks like it's in really good shape. And you don't want to, you know, when I took this out, I made sure to use two hands. I grabbed it from here and down here just to try and not pull and put too much on any of these links here. So I'm just going to make sure that's all still meshed up well, and hopefully we'll get to reuse that. Okay, so underneath the vehicle now, I'm going to try to not take this section of the exhaust off, but what I am going to do, I want to get this bracket off of here. So I'm going to start with that. I don't know, I may have to get this bracket off. That one looks like it's going to be a little more challenging, but I don't know. I have to get on the top side and see if that's actually attached to the transfer case or not. Those two, let's see if I can get my finger up there. Up here, I don't know if those two are actually attached to the transfer case or not, or if this, you know, this heat shield will come off with the transfer case. So I don't know, we'll see. But regardless, this, I want to get this bracket off of here. So there's some goofy sizes on this vehicle. So this one's a 13 millimeter right here, this guy. That's just a 10 right there, these two, so 10 millimeter. And then for the drive shaft, I'm gonna take that off. That's a T45, so that's a Torx bit, kind of one of those star bits. And then this, oh man, kind of got lodged under here, but this across the frame cross member right here also, I'm going to take that off with my impact, and that's a 15 millimeter. So I'm going to get all those off, and when I take that drive shaft off, I'm going to get I have some ratchet straps that I'm going to use. I'm going to grab one and just tie it around that that drive shaft, and then the exhaust, kind of where that hanger is, just cinch it around there just to keep it from dropping down, causing any damage. So I'll get that done, let you know how it goes. Okay, so I got that bracket off right there that had the 10 millimeter and the 13 millimeter. The 10 millimeters on the exhaust side were a little tricky to get off. You know, I use WD-40 on everything, but they were, I think because of the heat of the exhaust, they were, you know, maybe expanded a little bit, but you know, regardless, they were just a little tricky. They didn't come out as easy, but still not very difficult. Got the frame rail off, put those bolts right back in where they go. That was simple to get off. And now I cracked all these loose on the drive shaft. And all I'm using is, where is it? It's just like a little 6-inch 3/8 drive ratchet. I wish I had a longer one just to get a little bit more leverage on these, but they all loosened up pretty easy. And again, you know, I used WD-40 on those, and there's these little clips between here. I'm not exactly sure what the function of those is, but I'm just gonna make sure that I put those all in exactly where they came out. And I got a cinch strap around the drive shaft and the exhaust here right after the hanger, just to make sure that doesn't drop down on me, number one, or, you know, damage the link or anything. So this has taken me maybe, you know, 20-25 minutes. It's a little more tricky because I'm laying on my back, but you know, still not that hard at all. Okay, so the drive shaft came off extremely easily. You know, again, it's just those 6 bolts that just kind of bolt into the backside of the transfer case there. So it's just kind of hanging there. I can't get it past this point where, you know, I can get it away from the transfer case, but I really don't care because once I loosen up the transfer case, that'll just drop right out of there. So, okay, so I have decided I am going to take this bracket off, just because it's going to keep me from having to take any of the exhaust stuff off. So there are 4 bolts that hold this transfer case in place. There's one right there, and there's 2 on the top side of the transfer case on the other side that are the same as that, which I think that's like a Torx socket, which I don't have any of. So this is going to be a stopping point for today. And then the 4th one is this guy right here, just that one there that kind of goes through the transmission into the transfer case here. And that's you know, that's just a normal, probably a metric size there, but these other ones are these Torx bits, but kind of goofy. So anyway, these 2 up here, this one's really easy to get at. This one's kind of tricky. May need a swivel, something like that, but these are 13 millimeter. And then there's going to be this one here, that guy, and then this one back here, and I'm assuming they're all 13 millimeter. So, but these should all be fairly easy to get at. And then this will be out of the way, and then that'll give us access to the bolts on the top side of the transfer case, and then, you know, just make it all a lot easier to get at and not have to remove any of the exhaust components, because I did not want to have to tear into all that, or, you know, have to rip out the manifold from the backside of the motor. I've seen some guys do that, which I think there's ways of getting around that, and I definitely don't want to go down that route. So we'll see how this goes. But again, just taking this bracket off right here. All right, so I got that big bracket off. I realized I remember breaking my swivel a while back and I never replaced it. So to get at that top side one that was up there, I ended up just going on the top side of the motor with a 13mm ratcheting box end wrench. And you know, you just gotta kind of kneel on you know, the radiator frame up there, or whatever it's called, and just reach your arm down there, and it's actually not too difficult to get at. So those 5 are out. It gives me a lot more room to work on this side, get at the bolts that are on the other side of the transfer case up there. So really, I'm at a stopping point for today because I need to get this tool right here, which an 11mm 12 point. Like I said, I don't want to risk breaking one of these bolts, so I'm just gonna figure out exactly what that is and then order it and get back at this tomorrow. But you know, at this point, I mean, really, I've got maybe 2 to 2.5 hours work into this, and really I'm down to 4 bolts to get the transfer case out of there. And you know, then it's just installing the new one and putting it all back together. So this really has not been difficult at all. Kind of sucks laying on the ground doing this, but you know, could be worse. So I also wanted to mention, before I took this bracket off that was here, there's a heat shield on the side of this, the transfer case, that's attached with 1, 2, where's the third one? There's a third, oh, the third little 8mm bolt goes, I believe, into that, the bracket that was there. But you know, that was an easy thing, just a little 8mm socket to break those loose. So this is it so far for today. This, like I said, this has not been bad. Maybe 2.5 hours of actual turning wrenches. You know, I've taken some breaks for water, things like that. Here's my pile of parts that I have here. You know, the frame rail, the bracket, the nuts and bolts for everything, axle nut, the bracket for brakes, everything else. All right, so today we're gonna be getting the transfer case out of here. I got my E14 Torx socket for the 3 bolts that are holding the transfer case in place, and then, you know, again on the other side there's one that's just a standard standard head type bolt. On the top up here, this bolt right here, this has got this fitting on it. What I realized is this connects to like a breather tube on the top side. I'm going to show you that here. So that tube is right down here. It's this guy. So that's just a breather tube. Here's the end of it right here. So more than likely I'm going to have to replace that tube, because I'm noticing that where it attaches to that fitting down here, the tube's pretty dry rotted, so you can kind of see it. It's this one right here. So it's pretty dry rotted at the end. So I could, you know, probably shorten it up or just replace the tube. But you know, I cracked the first E14 bolt loose down here on the transfer case, which is that one right there, that one. And you know, again, I'm only using a little, like, what is this, 8-inch long ratchet. So I smacked it a couple times with a rubber mallet, but I do have a 12-inch long breaker bar coming today, 3/8 drive, that I'm going to use to hopefully crack the rest of them loose. But you know, a couple gentle smacks with the rubber mallet and that one cracked loose. All right, so this one on the bottom driver's side, that's a 13 millimeter. That one came out pretty easily too. So we'll continue the other two from the top side. All right, so the next one I'm trying to get at is right back there, which is kind of behind this exhaust down tube here. And again, I don't want to take any of the exhaust off, so I'm going to see if I can get at that with an extension and a breaker bar. And then the next one is right there between those two, and that one should be much easier to get at. All right, so I had to get a little creative on that top side one there. I have my 12-inch breaker, a 36-inch extension going in there with a swivel on the end of it, and a little bit of muscle, and it broke it right loose. So very easy. All right, so the last one is going to be right up in between those two, where that bracket ties on or threads into. So I'm using a 36-inch extension again to get at that one. So should be pretty easy. So we ended up using an 18-inch extension just because, I don't know, the 36 was flexing way too much. 18 inches gave us perfect clearance to get outside the wheel well here, and enough room to actually put some leverage onto that breaker bar to break the bolt loose. So right now, this is the last one. I just need to go up top here and disconnect that breather tube I mentioned earlier, and then the whole transfer case should come out. Okay, so that's it. The unit is out. Removing those 4 bolts is definitely not as difficult as it seems, and you do not need to take any of these exhaust components out. If you have 18-inch extension, a swivel, a 36-inch extension, you're good for all of it. Dropping the transfer case is definitely a 2-man job to loosen up that last bolt, and then slowly drop it. And there we are. We're about 3 hours into this, and really not that difficult at all. All right, so the transfer case is out. We're just opening it up to see exactly what failed in this thing and where the metal shavings are coming from. All right, so we got the transfer case opened up, and we can see the damage on pretty much every main gear there. That one's probably the worst. Pile of garbage in the bottom of this here. I really don't understand. We've put 10,000 miles on this vehicle. It's got, 140,000 on it. But what causes these gears to come apart like that? I mean, that is just insane. All the bearings seem to be in good condition. I don't see any of the rollers missing from any of them. So really kind of confused on what happened to this thing. But yeah, that's definitely the problem. All right, so I got the rebuilt transfer case, found it on eBay. Seems to be in pretty good condition. Everything turns and moves as it should. It's not making any goofy noises or anything. There is no fluid in it right now, but and I also got the recommended lubricant to put in the transfer case and new hose for the breather. I took this banjo bolt and breather tube off of the old transfer case. Make sure you keep that in good condition. I'm going to cut that piece of hose right off there. That's what that replacement hose is for. I'm going to blow this out real good with my compressed air and get it hung up in there and, continue on with the process. I also got a Haynes manual for this vehicle, just so I can have torque specs and any information. There isn't much information in here on replacing the transfer case, but there are torque specs, which is what I really wanted for putting all these bolts back in and getting it all put back together. All the bolts to put the suspension back together, the axle nut, torque. I just wanted to make sure I had all those. All right, so I got the banjo bolt and breather tube back on the transfer case. I couldn't find any torque spec on that. When I took it off, it came off really easily off the old transfer case. So I put a little bit of blue thread locker on there and snugged it down, and put that little plastic pin back in there, blew this all out, cleaned this guy here, cleaned the whole spline there. Also, if you'll see, it mounts here, here, and here. And then so the top side of this is kind of open, and this seals up against the transmission here. I've had this covered since I took the whole thing apart, but I blew out all in here just because there was garbage in there that gets in from the top side, just so when I'm putting it back together that I don't risk getting anything inside the transmission. And I have my bolts all ready. I think I'm going to start with this one here. I'm going to get the thing, I got a jack here. I'm going to put the transfer case up on a jack. I'm working solo today. My son's working, so I'm going to put the thing on a jack and get it jacked up there in the place, see if it meets up with the drive shaft okay, or if I have to attach the drive shaft to it first to get it into place. There wasn't really much play back and forth on that drive shaft, so also put a little more grease on the end of that drive shaft and then get it up there and start tightening it down. Okay, so about a half hour of actual work here, and this thing is back in. What I did is put a jack underneath the transfer case, had this bolt in the slot here, ready to be tightened in. Once I got the transfer case up into place, I pushed it onto the spline of the shaft of the transmission, and it actually met up pretty well. Just a tiny little bit of jiggling back and forth, and it met up. So then tighten this one in on the top side. The one bolt shaft, let's call it, has a like a keyway on it that sits inside the transmission or transaxle, whatever we want to call it. And then I started the other 3 bolts in there. Again, on this back one, that's the difficult one to get at because I did not want to remove the exhaust, but with a swivel, and I used an 18-inch extension right here to get it tightened in, but when I torque it down, I'm going to use a 36-inch out that way to get it in. Topside one there is pretty easy. The drive shaft did not want to go back into place with the transfer case where it was, and even with the play that's in here, I still couldn't get enough to get it into the transfer case. So what I ended up doing is putting a jack underneath that mounting bracket there where the drive shaft meets up with the rear drive shaft, and it's just 2 21mm bolts. I lowered it down, put the drive shaft into the transfer case here. It was simple to do. Got all the bolts in here, just have to find a torque spec on those, torque them down. I got the 21mm back in there, and now I'm just gonna torque everything down. But again, taking it one step at a time, just thinking about what I'm doing as I'm going. This is actually very easy to do, and I did not have to take any exhaust components off, which is a good thing. Just get those extensions, get your swivels, get the correct tools, and you're good. So there we are. Okay, so everything is torqued back down. These 2 right here, your 21mm that hold that drive shaft bearing in place on the 4x4 model, those get torqued to 35 foot-pounds. These Torx these Torx bolts here that connect the drive shaft to the transfer case, those are 27 foot-pounds, and then the 4 bolts that hold the transfer case to the transaxle or transmission, whatever we want to call it, those are all 33 foot-pounds. There's a 13mm over there, and then on the side over here is the T14s. So again, not difficult at all. It's tricky and challenging at points, but like I said, put the jack underneath this guy, loosen those two up, slowly bring it down. That'll allow the drive shaft to get into the end of the transfer case once you have the transfer case mounted up. I figured that was easier than taking the transfer case back out and meeting those two up. Or, you know, when I started this, I was considering mounting the transfer case to the drive shaft and then jacking the whole assembly up and getting it into place against a transaxle, which, you know, I think it probably wouldn't have caused me too much difficulty doing that, but you know, I did it this way, and it worked out fine. Okay, this reinstallation has actually been very easy. I've been taking my time. You know, I maybe have at the most an hour and a half into actually wrenching on this. So I got the transfer case put back in, torqued that all down, torqued the drive shaft bearing support back there, reinstalled this heat shield. Those are all just 8mm. Put this bracket back in. These are all 35 foot-pound for the bracket, and then put the this is a, you know, like an exhaust support here. I couldn't find any torque specs on this. I'm still going to look around, but I snugged them up. One thing to be careful of with the transfer case, when you're tightening this back up, make sure you follow the torque specs. This is aluminum, so you know it'll be easy to crack this, strip out the threads on this backside here. So again, that's aluminum, just be careful of that. Use the torque specs. Right now I just put the drive shaft back in. I slipped it back into the transfer case and transmission. I actually have the transfer case full of fluid right now, just checking to see that it's holding the fluid, there's no leaks. So like I was saying, I gotta slip the, tighten the nuts down on those two posts back there that hold the axle in place, figure out the torque specs on those. Slip the axle back into, and that's a 217 foot-pound torque spec on that axle nut there. So that one, I'm gonna have to, you know, see if I can rent a torque wrench or something for that. And then, you know, after that, we're on the home stretch here. A couple nuts and bolts to finish up here. And then, you know, I'll walk you through that and finish it up. All right, so the axle slipped into the spindle. This guy, I think in the manual they're calling this a steering knuckle, which is kind of weird, but I don't know. I know it is a spindle, but you know, steering knuckle, whatever. These guys are 85 foot-pounds. This one is 32, and I'm still working on this one. I'll let you know that in a second. All right, so what I found out is this one is 52 foot-pounds, this castle nut here. So, and I did lose that cotter pin when I started this, so I'm gonna kind of look for that right now. But, you know, everything went back together really smoothly on this. The axle slipped right in. The torque spec on this two bolts that hold the axle in place is 20 foot-pounds, 85 here, 32 here, 52 here. So, and then this one is 214, not 217, that's 214. So I'm gonna have to find a torque wrench for that one. But you know, like I said, it's all gone back together really easy. I think this is honestly less time than taking it apart. So, you know, total I'm maybe, you know, 5.5 hours into actual wrenching on this. So has not been that bad at all. All right, so it's all back together. The only thing I need is a torque wrench that'll hit 214 foot-pounds for that. The one other last thing that I forgot to mention was that the cross member for the frame here, there's 4 bolts that hold that, and each one of those 30 foot-pounds. So again, this was all really easy to get back together. It took me maybe like 3 hours total to get it back together, and I was really taking my time. And I changed the oil too. We greased the fittings on the ends here. So it's all back together. We're gonna start it up. Make sure that there's no leaks or anything. We got it full of transmission fluid. We put 3 quarts in. The trans axle, or the transfer case is full. And so we're gonna see what happens here. All right, so we're done. The 2005 Ford Escape, now we have about 100 miles on the newly rebuilt transfer case. Everything's good on it. The job overall was pretty easy. I have maybe 6 hours total into the job. When I was quoted, one guy, he said between 2,000 and 3,000, but he said closer to 3,000. And actually he never even called me back to give me a true quote on it. He didn't want to have anything to do with it. And the other guy, he said 3,700. I did it for, the transfer case and transmission fluid, transfer case fluid. I had to buy myself a couple tools, so I'm into it for like $710. Not bad. And, we got about 100 miles on it now, running good. Easy job. So if you have, the mechanical ability and a, pretty basic set of tools, you can do it yourself. Save yourself the money. I saved myself $3,000 doing this myself. So I want to thank you for watching this video. I hope it helps you out to get through this job. It's, like I said, it's not that difficult at all. And, in the end, all it is nuts and bolts holding some parts together. Just take it one step at a time, one bolt at a time. And again, I hope this helps you get through this.